started here. We have somebody who really doesn't need any introduction, but we'll introduce him anyway. Tippy is our featured guest speaker. Seems to be that every year almost.
Haven't missed one yet.
Maybe we should call him the featured Cam, but that's okay. He's our second speaker with an asteroid named after him. That is 11378 Dioria. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Tippy for, geez, how many years now?
I'm just a kid, so I don't know.
Well, I'm only 6. That's what I tell my wife. So you must be 7. So let's give a nice warm welcome for Tippy.
Here's your book. Okay. Well, as you can see, the talk that I'm doing today is Amateur Astronomy, Frustrations and Rewards. These are events that we've all had, or if we haven't had them yet, you will have them. These are stories that have actually happened to me over the years, and I've got there's about 200 slides I want to show you, but don't worry, we're going to go through them quite quickly. There's the first 100. Well, what is amateur astronomy? Let me see. Where's the clicker on this one?
The little arrows. The little arrows on the right, Tippy.
No, that's advancing.
Yeah. And then that's that green button is the pointer.
Well, I need to. Okay, there you go. Amateur astronomy is a hobby whose participants enjoy watching the night sky and the daytime too, for sunspots, eclipses, and the plethora of objects found mainly with portable telescopes and binoculars. Even though scientific research is not our main goal, many amateur astronomers make contributions to astronomy by monitoring variable stars, tracking asteroids, finding supernovas, discovering objects such as asteroids and comets. But as some of you might know, I served on a World War II diesel submarine during the Korean War. And it was during that time, this was back in 1954, my first exposure to astronomy. I was an electrician's mate when I was on the submarine, and electrician's mates on submarines didn't get to go topside. We kind of lived in a tube. The topside watches and line handlers and such as that were done by torpedomen or seamen. But electricians very, very seldom ever got to go topside. But I had a quartermaster that was well, I wouldn't say he was a drunk, he was a friend of mine. All my friends were actually, well, anyway. He was going to go topside to what we call shooting stars. When you're at sea, that's how you find out where you're at. You take a sextant and you shoot the stars and you can get your location. We were operating in the North Atlantic, and he asked if I would go up there to help him shoot stars. I said, I'd love to go. So he got permission from the skipper if I could go topside with him. I went topside with him, and my first exposure was when we opened the hatch to go topside. Trust me, in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, in the middle of the night, it is dark. It was almost like you would bump your head on a layer of stars. Now, this was the ship that I served on. Right there was a painting of it. In the North Atlantic at night, the stars on the dark, they just like diamond dust all over the place. And that was my first exposure, because he would show me stars. I didn't know much about astronomy. I didn't know anything about the constellations, but I did know Arcturus, Polaris, such as that would be used for navigation. You got to duck your head to keep from bumping into the heavens. You're truly alone there with the stars. Well, that was my first exposure. Then, 26 years later, I got my first view of Saturn. It was actually smaller than this. A friend of ours, some of you might know him, because he used to be a member here, and he'd come to this Wind Star party. His name was John Sims. He was a young friend of my wife and I. And John brought over a telescope to our house one night. So he sets it up in the backyard and points to the sky, and he says, "You see that star?" He says, "That's not a star, that's a planet." And I said, "Yeah, sure, right. Whatever you say, John, it's fine with me." But he had this little telescope. Well, actually, it wasn't a telescope. I can't remember the name of it, but it was class telescope. And I said, "Okay, I'll take a look at it." So I looked through the telescope, and this is what I saw, only smaller. I tried to make it smaller in Photoshop, but I didn't make it small enough. But it knocked my socks off, because you could see the rings around it. I kind of looked around to the front of this little toy telescope, and to see if there was a little cardboard Saturn hanging there that I was watching. I was hooked. Now, I tell people, don't buy a telescope. When they ask me, how do you get started? I say, don't buy a telescope. Buy a binocular. But you have to understand that when I saw this, it had to be night. And before my wife and I went to bed, we owned a telescope just like it. That's how hooked I got. We went out and bought one that night. I still have it. I use it. It was a guide scope on my 10. So that same year, we joined the Southern Cross Astronomical Society, one of the older societies. It was founded in 1922. And I soon learned that the astronomers were different from other types of club members. Now, I've been in all kinds of clubs. I've been in camera clubs, I've been in boating clubs and fishing clubs and what have you. And if you go to a fishing club, you'll find the guy that catches all the fish all the time. This guy's always the one getting the fish. And you say, "Where do you get the fish?" He says, "Well, I can't tell you. It's a secret spot." Or you see the beautiful black and white photograph. You say, "Boy, that's just a dynamite photograph. How do you do that?" He says, "Well, that's a secret. I do that in a darkroom. I can't tell you how I do that." But with astronomy, you get an astronomer, and he learns something new. He can't keep his mouth shut. He's got to tell somebody how to do it better. It's amazing. It's the most amazing group of people I've ever been associated with in my whole life. I'm blessed. We got involved with our club. We joined the Southern Cross then. We got involved with the club. We went to star parties and participated in outreach programs. Both were soon on the board of fellows. And that stirred up a little bit of a pot, too, because when I was on the board first, and when we tried to get Patty on the board, some of the board members didn't like that. They said, "Well, you can't have a husband and wife team on there because, then they tried to rule everything." Little did they know, my wife and I never agree on anything. So that wasn't going to work. So we were rapidly becoming amateur astronomers. Now,
Actually, there's been quite a few husband and wife
yes.
chairs in our board.
Well, we broke the mold on that, and we were the first husband and wife team, but now there's been several of them. Amateur astronomers attend local group meetings and public star parties, and sometimes travel to great distances to attend eclipses and such as that. This is me one time giving an opening address at a winter star party. But most of all, astronomers just want to have fun. So let's talk about frustrations. This hobby is fraught with frustrations and rewards. Now, don't confuse rewards with awards. I've gotten my share of awards before, but rewards are something all of you can get. I've been lucky enough to get a lot of them, but the rewards are the ones you never forget. Let's look at some frustrations. Now, I'm frustrated by being neat. I'm normally organized. This is my office in my old house. As you can see, everything's nice and ordered. You can't find the chair that I sit on. There's a desk in there, and there's a chair in there. I actually had a pair of those grocery store clipper things that when you wanted to get something, I have to lean over and grab it. So I sat around to designing my first telescope. And I was not too happy with the little telescope that I started out with, that little Tasco. We didn't want that. So my first scope, I wanted to build a scope that would not be a copy of John Dobson's mount. Didn't want that. I wanted it to be a smooth operating telescope. I wanted it to be economical. And after a year of careful planning, I came up with this design. Now, the scope did not meet with my high expectations. The azimuth adjustment was rough as a cob, and the altitude adjustment failed to be as smooth as I had wanted. So I had a second attempt. Now I decided that I wanted something I could take images with. I wanted the equatorially mounted the scope so it would track the sky. I also wanted a precision clock drive that I could count on. And I wanted it to be balanced perfectly. 2 years later, it was finished. Once again, clock drive was not as accurate as I wanted. Counterweight was hard to balance. Scope was just a bit shaky. Another failure. For my final attempt, I finally realized I was running out of time, so I decided to buy a ready-made scope and modify it to meet my needs. That seemed to be the right thing to do. So after 3 years of failed telescope building, I had, well, you can see. I still had problems. So I finally put a Mars eye on there to finish it out. But anyway, just remember when things just don't go right, things can... Even the pros make mistakes. Here you see a mistake by an excellent optician and telescope maker. That's Peter Saraballo, who is upside down looking through this. This is not a reflector. This is a refractor. The mistake here is not making sure that the mount was high enough. It was that the mount should all get on the plane when you come down. The center section of the mount never got shipped with the rest of it. So before you start any of these projects, seek out one of your club's expert advisors. They've been around a long time and got a lot of experience. So this was an image taken at one of the first winter star parties that we had at the Boy Scout camp. We upgraded our department store telescope, and I got a mirror from Richard Fagan, and I built this 10-inch. I forgot about this little scope. This is a little 4.5 that I had. That was actually a Fagan scope too, and there's a 12-inch octagon shape that we had. Notice on this, when I built this with the intent of taking images with it. You can see I've got a camera hanging on it here, guide scopes. There's also a trunnion there. If I wasn't going to do astrophotography, I could just drop it in a rocker box and I was off with a Dob and running. As with any new pieces of equipment, you get bugs in it before you get worked out. So after we got all the bugs out of it, we ended up with this fine trio of telescopes. This is our family of scopes that we ended up with. 18-inch f6, 12-inch f5.4, and a 10-inch f6. That's my wife. She's a 10. Aperture fever finally under control. Vic Bernard, my friend, used to tell me for aperture control, I'd call him and say, I got aperture fever. He'd say, take 2 Urfels, call me in the morning. The WSP beginnings. After we joined the Southern Cross in 1980, we attended several of the big star parties. And in those days, I was eager and wanted to do things. I was sort of a lead follower, get the hell out of the way kind of guy. Today, not so much. But during that time, during a board meeting back in 1983, my wife and I, an astronomer friend of ours has since passed, Skip Jarrett, and Richard Fagan, wanted to we came up with the idea for the Winter Star Party. We took it to the board and wanted the board to let us do it. And they said, no, too much liability, too much money, too much work, too much this, too much that. So we kept getting shot down. So we told the board that, well, we're going to do it anyway. And when we did that, they kind of said, well, all right, if you're going to do it, go ahead and do it. But don't embarrass us. And we can't give you any money. Now, Bill Douglas was our president at that time. He's looking down on us now, and I don't think he's embarrassed. Better not be. So, well, we were off. And there was the problems of where, when, why, and the frustrations. Well, believe it or not, the first Winter Star Party was determined, well, first thing we wanted a star party that people would come to. We didn't know when to hold it. A lot of people were having star parties in the summertime, and we didn't want to compete with anybody well established because we kind of wanted a sure thing. So we just said, let's have a Winter Star Party. It sure as hell shouldn't be hard to get people, well, from Michigan or Detroit, or they're both in the same place, by the way. But anywhere up north to come to Florida in February. That shouldn't be a big deal. We selected a 3-day weekend on Washington's birthday. And we selected that weekend, not astronomically speaking, not because of the new moon or anything like that, but because it had never rained on Washington's birthday that we knew of in Miami. So we selected that weekend to hold the star party. We advertised in Sky and Telescope and Astronomy magazine. We had Richard Fagan's home address there, but Richard had since moved, so nobody knew where he was. So I tried to get him to change it. I changed it all over, swung it all over on my side. Well, first thing you know, we have to find a site. Where are we going to do this? We settled on February. We settled on Washington's birthday. So we started looking around. We drove in my van. We went down to the Everglades National Park, and we went to every parking lot in the national park from the entrance till we got to Flamingo and investigated every one of them. And at West Lake was one of the places where I walked down by the boat ramp, and I was looking out to see the southern horizon. We were looking for where you get a good southern horizon, too. And my wife was standing there, and she's hollering at me, get out of there, get out of there, get out of there. I didn't see it, but there was a big alligator by the ramp, too. I had almost gotten eaten by an alligator down there. But in any case, we settled on Mahogany Hammock. Now, we've decided this is where we want to have it, but now how do we get permission to have it? The Everglades National Park is a national park. And in fact, you can't just go in there and just do it. So we went to the management of the park and said, this is a proposal we want to do. Well, we had several restrictions, and they were brutal. No camping. Can't camp there at the Mahogany Hammock site. You can't keep the general public out because they paid to get into the park, and they're entitled to go anywhere in the park that they want to go. If you're going to have that kind of people, you have to provide toilets. So we had to provide porta potties. So we got permission. We put the porta potties out there. I'll never forget the first time we put the porta potties out there, because as soon as we got them set up, here comes a busload of German tourists. And where did they go first? They almost filled. Now you have to understand that this site was 75 miles out of town. We didn't have daily service on these things either. So I decided to put locks on them, wrapped them up, and put out of order. Now, how out of order can a hole in a wall be? but we had to do that to lock them up so that we would have them there for when we used them. Well, registration was a card table, Skip Jarrett and I sitting at the entrance to the Everglades National Park saying, here we go. We start off, we pulled 100 people to that first star party. We held it there for 3 years. The other thing was that when you set your equipment up, because it was a national park, you'd have to take it down every day, pack it all up and move out of there so the other tourists can get in. So it was set everything you got up every single day, tear it down, set it back up again. How we survived the Winter Star Party, I'll never know. Those first 3 years were brutal. So we outgrew the mahogany hammock, and then we came down here and investigated. My wife said, let's go down. There's a Boy Scout camp down there on West Summerlin Key that we could investigate. So several of us came down. We investigated the Boy Scout camp. I met with the leader, the guy in charge of that. I can't think of his name right now because he's mad at me. We ended up having a big fight and all that. But anyway, we swung a deal for the Boy Scout camp. We were limited to 300 people, and we filled that up. We went there for 3 years, and in 1990, we decided, well, we got so big, we could have 1,000 people here, no problem, if we had the room. So I negotiated with the Girl Scout camp to do the Boy Scout camp and the Girl Scout camp and put it all together. And that was working out pretty good because we had about 600 people signed up when the Boy Scouts informed me that they were going to back out of the deal. And they said, no, too much responsibility, we don't want this anymore, we're not going to do it. So 2 weeks before the event, the Boy Scout camp pulled out. So we were stuck with just the Girl Scout camp. Luckily, we sold out, and we've been sold out almost every year since then, and we've been here for over 20 years. So the WSP is not just a great star party, it's also a social event. And as Vic Menard told me once, he said the WSP is like fine wine. It just keeps getting better every year. I like to think of the WSP as a family reunion with 600 relatives you like. At the first one, this is at well, there's the porta potties at the first one of the star party. And here's an old Coulter Odyssey. I got to tell you a story about Tom Clark. Most of you know of or heard of Tom Clark. He founded Tektron Telescopes and has provided big aperture scopes to a lot of people at a reasonable price and good quality. But Tom wasn't always as sharp as a tack like he is now. Back then, he, like myself, was trying to find out how to get into astronomy. So he asked questions. He says, I wonder what kind of telescope should I get? And he got some advice from some club members that said, well, I hear the 13-inch Odyssey's pretty good. So he said, okay, I'll get one. So he calls up Coulter and orders out this 13-inch telescope. A few weeks later, 2 packages, 68 pounds worth of stuff shows up, postage due $80, and he didn't know what the hell it was. He thought Jeannie, his wife, had ordered something. He opens it up, and there's this rocker box of telescope. He didn't expect that. He was expecting a 13-inch telescope. I'm not lying about this. I don't make this stuff up. Other frustrations. One always worries about the weather at a major star party. Remember the frustrations? First time it rained on an opening day on Winter Star Party? Astronomers panic as flooding threatens opening day at Winter Star Party. That's how we handle it. The worst ever was at the first Chiefland Star Party. I had picked up my 18-inch scope and a brand new trailer in 1987 from over in Sarasota, and Vic and Lynn and Tom and Jeannie and the whole crew from of the local group. We're going up to Chiefland for the star party. Dave Knowlton was there with his Airstream motor home. And I'll never forget it. That first night it rained, well, it rained so hard that every single tent was blown away. One with a girl in it. They're tumbling down the road. Mud, the Airstream sunk down to the axles. I think it took like 4 hours to dig it out with bulldozers and everything at the end. I got a couple of stories to tell you about it, but one, it was very damp and dewy one night. So the next morning, Tom Clark and I are sitting there, we're drinking coffee, and Tom tells me, now remember I told you he wasn't really smart back then. He says, the primary mirrors on both of our scopes were just soaking wet, just water running off of them. Looked like Bridal Veil Falls. And he says, oh, I'll tell you how to get that off real easy, no problem. He says, goes over to my scope and he points it at the sun. He says, that's going to just dry it off right away. So he goes over to his scope and he aims his scope at the sun. And he turned around and looked at me and he says, look at your scope, look at the steam coming off of it already. It wasn't steam. It was smoke. My damn scope was on fire. The sun come down, hit the primary mirror. It wasn't perfectly collimated. Sorry, shame on me, bad me. But it come back up, hit the secondary, it's burning a hole right through the focuser. That's not bad enough. Look over at Tom's scope, smoking. So he did it too. This is my 18-inch f6. This was built, the optics on this was built by Ed Beck. It's probably one of the finest telescopes I've ever looked through for tiny pinpoint star images. When I first bought this scope, we said here, I don't know if it was to the Boy Scout side or here, must have been the Boy Scout side, when Tom still owned this scope, we put Omega Centauri at 1100 power and just blew that Omega Centauri apart. That night, I said, if you ever sell that scope, I want it. So I bought it when he got it up. But in those days,
Is that a dumbbell on the back there?
a dumbbell operated it.
Oh.
Yes, you're very astute. There is a dumbbell there. And that was to compensate for some of the eyepieces. I had to put the dumbbell in there. I had a metal plate that we added as well. But this material here, back then, when this picture was taken, this liner was all styrofoam. Tom Dobson called it the coffee cup. We had several problems with that styrofoam. We had holes that kept getting poking in it. My wife would carry this end of it, and I would carry the heavy end with the mirror in it. But one night at the Everglades, the park rangers saw us loading the thing up or unloading it and thought that Patty was having a bit of a problem with it, so he came running over there to help her and put his hand through there, through the styrofoam, punched a hole in it, so we redid it. And then you'll hear a little bit later on about what happened with that. Now, I sold this scope. This scope currently lives with Mike Reynolds. I wanted to keep it in the family. Frustrations of astrophotography. Astrophotography, this is just a breed in itself. It's an ideal function of amateur astronomy that just, for people who just love pain and frustration. Just to give you an example, these are the qualifications of an astrophotographer as I see fit. Graduate, this is just to work the auto guider. You need a PhD for CCD work. Superhuman dexterity with wires and Velcro. This is cool.